I still do not understand why you want to break into the system.
Because, man, somewhere in one of these memories is the evidence. Hey, it's the big master control program everybody's been talking about.
Kevin Flynn, computer genius. Taken prisoner and held captive within the digital world of the computer itself. Trapped inside an electronic arena where love and escape do not compute. Within the NCOM 511 computer, there exists an unknown civilization, a startling new world where time and distance.
It's really creating a myth for modern time.
Still say it to this day, nothing looks like it. I think my first memory of Tron is renting it on VHS tape.
I was 12 years old.
Maybe 12, 13.
I was 2 when Tron came out.
I remember getting dropped off by my mom.
My uncle took me to go and see it in a cinema in Wales.
My mom would go around the mall while we went to the movie alone because we went with my parents and we were very young. And I remember just sitting there and just being overwhelmed by this.
For me, it was something I wasn't totally familiar with, but I always just knew it was Tron.
The screen looked unlike anything I had ever seen a movie screen look like.
I remember Jeff Bridges, and I remember that it looked crazy.
It's begun. It's incredible to imagine having this baton that turns into this destructive light bike game.
When we were doing Tron, we had so many limitations, but we just kept going for it.
The original was very cutting edge at the time. Of course, looking back, it looks like an old black and white TV show. But at that time, there was no laptop computers, no internet, nothing.
We didn't have cell phones. We had walkie-talkies that looked like out of a World War II movie. They were called cordless phones, and quite a phenomenon.
Computers like back then were just this incredible, mysterious thing.
There were no PCs. People genuinely feared computers, and they only existed as mainframes.
User requests are what computers are for. Doing our business is what computers are for.
Reading this script and seeing some of the technical language of it, I didn't understand a word of it. And I called my agent, and I told him I wanted to turn it down. I said, no, I don't understand it. Let's look for something else.
I don't get it.
Okay.
It's really interesting talking to Bruce Boxleitner and Jeff about how they were saying terms like program and bit without having any idea what it meant.
Do you think we can merge with this memory bit?
They had no idea, how close they were to predicting a future in which terms like program were second nature.
Hey, it's the big master control program everybody's been talking about.
Tron, I think, was ahead of its time as a tribute to Steven Lisberger.
Steven Lisberger was exploring themes and ideas that have, taken 30 years to become relevant.
Every one of us is in that computer somewhere, whether it's because of our driver's license or Social Security or income tax.
This is a guy who understood things in the early 80s that nobody did.
When we did the first film, the feeling we had about cyberspace was that it was this new frontier and that there was unlimited potential, but there was this sense of unbridled optimism.
Before most people had desktops, Steven Lisberger imagined a world where people would go live alternate realities in a digital universe.
You're a user?
I took a wrong turn somewhere.
We're actually using technology that was kind of hinted at in the original TRON.
These days with Facebook, you know, people's blogs, it's kind of something we take for granted, this kind of alter ego. So in a way, the world has kind of caught up with TRON finally.
As the decades rolled out, cyberspace went through the phases that all frontiers go through, where it had to be civilized, and then there's a certain amount of cynicism that comes with that. So I think there's an underlying nostalgia for the frontier days when it was all about unbounded potential.
Every tower is lighting up.
What Lisberger did was he not only gave a sense to something that was coming, but at the same time, he designed something that was timeless.
The look of the world from the original film still hasn't dated, weirdly. It still works for me because I think it isn't just trying to look futuristic.
He had amazing collaborators. He had Sid Mead, who's one of the greatest concept designers of all time.
TRON was a tour de force of technique matched to very difficult methods of bringing that vision off.
Technically, you know, it was the first movie to use computer graphics extensively.
TRON was one of the first films to have more than 20-some minutes computer-generated footage.
We were not nominated for a Special Effects Academy Award because basically the Academy thought we cheated when we used computers to do special effects. Things have certainly changed since then.
The computer world at that time was very limited.
We had no computers on the set of TRON, and probably your cell phone has more computing power in it than we had on the whole movie.
In fact, the limitation produced a lot of the design, the look of the various vehicles. My original idea for the light cycle was to have the rider with a faceplate, and when he got on the bike, the faceplate would match the bike, and he would articulate onto the bike sort of like a pressure suit.
And they just couldn't do it. The computing power just didn't exist to render at that level. Lisberger and team had to use practical tools to make a world that looked digital.
They kind of basically made a movie look digital using handcrafted methods, which is just mind-boggling when you talk to Steve about how every frame had to be hand-tinted frame by frame in order to make them feel illuminated.
The set was just basically black duvetine with a white adhesive tape, you know, marking the things, shot in 70mm black and white.
They sent all of the film over to, Korea to have, all the lights painted in.
So that was the technology. We were all, whoa, this is great,
I ran around in a black and white leotard with our circuitry drawn on us with a black Sharpie. And we had a hockey helmet, motocross pads. I know when we went to the commissary, there was a thing that came down saying that would actors please wear bathrobes because it was skin tight and we didn't have any pants on. We had like a first male thong.
What's amazing to me is that TRON wasn't a huge success.
It was almost too far ahead of its time. I think audiences just couldn't connect to the notion of users and programs.
But then, of course, became this cult classic afterward, largely because of the risks they took.
It's a movie that people appreciate much more now with the benefit of history. And their creative thinking was so strong that it's influenced a number of artists for a long, long time.
So many people have referenced it and copied it in every type of medium, and it became its own thing entirely.
It was a Strokes album, clearly, inspired by TRON. TRON has been everywhere.
What Lisberger came up with really touched a nerve with people and really kind of ignited imaginations in some way.
The original movie was so influential to people who are now artists or designers. There's so many people out there who say, I went to design school because of TRON.
It's great when people say to me, you know, I got into writing software or video games, or I became a computer scientist because I was so inspired by TRON when I was 12 years old.
A lot of your special effects people now in the industry, that was what they saw when they were in grade school or high school, and that has prompted a lot of them to be what they are today.
This is the third year that we're doing TRON here at Comic-Con.
For our generation, there are a couple like sort of seminal movies. There's like Star Wars being one, but TRON had this added element of being about what's possible in our world and what could be in our world that maybe we're not aware of.
That's TRON. He fights for the users.
Science fiction always kind of leads the way to science fact. As I was told by somebody at NASA, Hollywood creates the dream, and then we take that dream. We try to make it a reality.
I was part of a generation that was very into looking for new frontiers, whole new worlds. And now that the technology is here and part of everyday life, this film, it really belongs to the generation who grew up with this technology. They're not intimidated by it. They see the technology as something that can be clearly used for good or bad. It's their story.
I think the most difficult thing in doing TRON was to marry the computer simulation moments with the live action photography and have them feel like they were all in the same place. The fact that we were shooting people in black and white costumes on sets that were black and matting those people into computer simulated worlds, that many of those backgrounds were, you know, computer simulated scenes, and then you were putting people in them, or you were putting computer simulated images into graphically created scenes and then matting people into that, to have that all homogenized and feel like it was the same place, so you didn't say, oh, that was done this way and this was done this way. And also that the work done by Magi, III, Abels, all married together and felt like one thing. So you would say, oh, that was done by Magi and that was done by III, so that it just became a homogenized, you know, world that all melted together. As a design problem and as a filmmaking problem, I think that was the most difficult thing to do. But it was what I was most pleased with, that it did work so well. I noticed very early on in my work with computer simulation that all the different companies who did it basically had their own technique for doing it. It's like they each had their own kind of hot rod and their own kind of crew, and they were all hybrid systems. And the most difficult thing was, you know, getting them to have the same vocabulary, the same understanding, the same description of three-space motion, the same description of a color. And but after looking at it for a while, I realized that there were similarities that everybody understood, and basically it's everybody's understanding of three-space, of dimensional choreography. How surfaces were rendered, you know, whether one company could make something shinier or smoother or more like chrome, that's also basically, when you get down to making a picture, a matter of art direction.
When we started dealing with the computer companies on TRON, you have to remember that a lot of the people who develop software for computers are not really filmmakers. They didn't begin their career as filmmakers, and so they won't approach the creation of visual imagery in the same way that a filmmaker will. We went in not knowing anything about computer technology. We only knew what we wanted to achieve on the film. But with discussions with the development groups in each company, we were convinced that we could actually develop the technology as we went along and marry it with the creative needs and end up with a film that would look good. As an example, we wanted a feeling of vast scale in TRON. We wanted that cycle arena to feel like it was miles wide. When a computer creates a picture, it will create everything crystal clear. So something that's a mile away will actually appear as clear and distinct and as well lit as something that's a foot away. And that just doesn't look real. So we said, you know what we need? We need a feeling of atmosphere in these shots. We have to make it look like things that are far away are far away. And in real life, you do that by softening the focus and, you know, kind of dimming the colors. And we came up with something that is really very simple, I think a standard technique now in computer graphics called depth cluing. You assign a mathematical progression to the light of the points, depending how far away they are from the camera source. The farther away they are, the less distinct they are, and that makes them look farther away. It's something you automatically get in live-action photography, but it's something that you have to mathematically apply to a computer image. Again, it was this constant give and take of our visual requirements with their technical possibilities that created TRON. When we finished TRON, we had pushed the technology of these computer companies, I think, many, many years ahead of where they would have been if they hadn't worked with us during the feature. Once we'd finished the storyboard on a scene, we'd have to describe the scene in a little more technical way. We'd have our blueprints and layouts of the actual objects, our blueprints of the models, of the tank or the recognizer, and our blueprints of the canyons. And then we'd supply whatever supplementary diagrams or pictures were needed so the programmers could understand what it was they were entering. This, as an example, is a diagram that we did for that shot of the recognizer flying out of the canyon, out of the garbage dump. We just kind of did an overall layout. Although you would never see this in the film, we want to describe to the programmer exactly what was going on. Because to the computer, this environment actually existed. So you can see the garbage dump here and the walls, and you can see the floor and the canyon, and how the canyon was related to this area. Although you would never see this area in the film. If you notice this little thing here, this is our camera, and this is where it would be placed in the beginning of the scene, shooting the recognizer. And as the recognizer flew out this direction and toward this canyon, the camera would turn and then follow the recognizer. So we drew a diagram for the RICO path and for the camera path. We did additional schematic diagrams, actual blueprint drawings on graph paper. But this kind of drawing, just a basic artist's view, was very helpful in visualizing the actual action we were asking for. As an example, we'd supply a drawing that would look something like this. This had a kind of a schematic view looking down on the garbage dump and talk about the frame numbers and the number of feet that the object actually traveled in a certain amount of time.
The light cycle was a particular problem because it was being done by a facility who used the memory bank shape library kind of image production. In other words, you take set volumes and subtract or add to them. And that produced a problem. The light cycle was a concept in the film which was produced by a command wand that the warriors or the riders carried, and they would grasp this wand like the handlebars, and then the bike would materialize around them. The problem was that the image producing system did not accommodate the combination of shapes that I had designed to make the bike look like it looked. Another problem was simply money. Originally we envisioned the riders wearing costumes that had segments much like a lobster, let's say, and when they would crouch over in the seat and match up to the windshield part, their bodies would then become part of the bike. This required much, much more computer animation than they could afford. And that's why the bicycles, the light cycles, form, and then in a flash they go over the rider's head and all becomes an enclosed shape.
We knew that there was a lot of computer graphics to do for this film, and it was always intended that we do about 15 or 20 minutes, which was a huge amount. Nobody had ever really undertaken that amount.
Yeah, after the initial terror of realizing that we were going to use a medium no one had ever used before, including us, we started to recognize the unique possibilities of working in the computer and the things that it would do for us, that it would free us from camera movement and free us from all kinds of restraints. And it would give us the ability to do something that was very difficult to do in 2D, and that is actually go into the scene, to do Z moves, actually immerse yourself within objects and travel as if you were a point of view. That's something that you couldn't do. Remember, drawings you can go back and forth and up and down, but you can't go in.
So if you look at the stylization of TRON, there are several major conceptual decisions we made. One was that there was no sun in the electronic world. Everything had its own light. It was all made of energy, so the world that we designed had a very specific design style based on what we could do with the live action characters, what we could do with the CG, and how we could marry them. Because it's a fantasy world, you can make those rules up. The vehicles, the flying scenes, the moving stuff, the light cycles, of course, the whole MCP sequence is all computer generated. The backgrounds, every part of that is CG. There was no Photoshop. There was no manipulating objects like graphics in a two-dimensional way. The modeling of objects was incredibly complicated and difficult, and Magi Synthevision had their way, but it had limits as to what kind of shapes you could create. You couldn't create any shape you could imagine. When it had multiple curves, it couldn't, create a spline or rotate an object to create a shape. And then the render time for frames was phenomenal. I mean, it was 10 minutes a frame or that type of thing.
All right, let's get this show on the road.
This was before the world went digital, so we were talking about computers and companies that were one of a kind. Each one had their own hot rod, turboed in its own way. They had their own software and hardware and their own film recorders, and they were diverse. Maybe they shared some algorithms here and there, but it was on the very beginning edge of where that technology was and becoming somewhat dependable.
When you went to these places, it was as if one was going into weird occult mystical laboratories where people were conjuring up things that the rest of the world felt very uneasy about. It's a hard thing to convey to people today what it felt like then. But there was something sort of like, oh my God, these are Frankenstein labs, and when these creatures come forth, we're all going to pay a price.
There were 4 companies that worked on the film: Magi Synthevision, Information International, Robert Abel and Associates, and Digital Effects. The real world to the electronic world transition that was done in the movie, which was done by the Abel Studios, was done by Kenny Merman, and it was a very unique and beautifully designed piece, I thought. That was really complex. That was actually shooting vector graphic computers, making a whole bunch of lines add up to be a shape, putting color filters on the camera, shooting a pass, then putting bipack mats in the camera, shooting another pass, and there are lots of incredible amounts of time and energy put into that transition. When you're actually going down that first tunnel, there's like blue static kind of stuff flashing around in there. That's actually static from the bipack mag. And there was so many passes and so many times every time that they tried to do it, they always got this static discharge. But it was there, and there was no way we could really finally get rid of it. So, hey, put a sound effect there, The other company that worked on the picture was Digital Effects, a company in New York City that Judson Rosebush had put together. They did the TRON logo at the beginning, where you see the pieces coming together to form the character, and they also did the bit.
2 companies, Magi Synthevision in New York and III here in Los Angeles. We're going to do the majority of the work.
The way the work was divided up between the 2 companies was that Magi Synthevision did generally the more simple objects because their modeling system put basic geometries together. By adding and subtracting primary shapes, you create an object, and that's how they modeled. Even though they might look complex on film, they did the light cycles, the recognizers, the tanks.
One of the reasons we asked Magi Synthevision to do the light cycles specifically is that the design by Sid Mead of the light cycles was such that you could take these basic geometric shapes and slice them and dice them and kind of put them back together again, and you came up with a light cycle that was really pretty cool and pretty incredible. And coming off a design of Sid Mead, it looked bang, it looked exactly like it.
For things that had multi-curves and more complex designs, Information International was far superior on that level because they were making polygonal models where you would literally draw an object out in 3 views, divide it up into polygons, and encode those images the drawings were huge, like this, and there was a big digitizing tablet. It was 4 by 6 feet roughly, and so every little point was digitized. So you're making a wire mesh type model rather than solid objects interpenetrating each other. So they had 2 diverse ways of making models, and III's was much more complex. So III did Sark's Carrier and the Solar Sailor and the MCP and things that had multi-curves and shapes. There was one computer at Information International, the computer, not Like, not like we had multiples, we had one race car. And it was called the Foonly. And the whole thing was this big old hardwired computer that was about as big as 4 deep freezers put together, roughly 15 feet by about 8 feet wide. And this thing would glitch. You just never knew when it was going to glitch. We finally ran preventive maintenance on it all the time. But that didn't really assure anything, because really somebody walking into the room that had on a fur coat could set the thing off. So it was really walking on thin ice with that computer, and it was the iris that everything that came out of III had to go through. So if it ever really broke down in some major way, we would not have made the movie.
III had a very, very tough job. They had to create the Solar Sailor, which we knew what we wanted it to look like, but Stephen was insistent that it have translucent sails. And I lobbied somewhat heavily for non-translucent sails. I said, Stephen, we could be sinking ourselves here, excuse the pun, with the Solar Sailor if we go with translucent sails. And he said, quite rightly, look, the look of it needs to be ethereal. It needs that translucency. It needs to be a magical craft. And if it has solid sails, it just doesn't work. It doesn't look as beautiful. It's not as elegant. And so he stuck to his guns. And when we saw the creation of the Solar Sailor, which was one of the first things that III did, and as it builds up and you see these wonderful translucent sails, I tell you, there were a lot of great moments during that year, and that was one of them. And so there was certainly a different look to what the two different companies were going to do, always searching for that consistency. We didn't want it to look like, oh, well, this company did this part of the film and this company did this part of the film. In fact, there are areas in the film right in the middle where the transition takes place where you do see shots that are Magi Synthovision shots and then III shots and then Magi Synthovision shots, and they all work together very well. So we were very fortunate that despite the two different technologies, we still had a consistency.
I was working at the Disney Studios. I was an animator on Mickey's Christmas Carol when Tron was being produced. Two of my friends, Jerry Reese and Bill Croyer, were working on Tron, and they were doing the storyboarding and the choreography, you might say, of all the computer animation. They were over in one of the trailers, and they had a computer that was hooked via phone line back to New York with Magi Synthovision. And my good friend Chris Wedge was back there working on the animation, and he would send over the phone line the scenes frame by frame by frame for them to look at, some of the early renderings. For me, this was some of the very first computer animation I had ever seen, and it was so exciting. The first scene that I remember them working on was the light cycle sequence, and it absolutely blew me away.
You had to have a completely symbiotic relationship with the computer technicians. They had never done film, and we had never used computers. You couldn't have all the tools you wanted because you didn't know what tools you would need. It became this process of learning about what the technology could do and then brainstorming the creative side to use it. There really was no software to make anything move. There was only software to describe where things sat. And if you wanted something to go from here to here, it was literally as simple as, X is 4, now X is 6, there's 2 units, and that was that. I mean, there was just nothing else, around. So suddenly, Jerry Reese and I, who were the only animators on the whole show, were faced with the situation of trying to create what we consider to be Disney's quality animation, which meant animation that moved with personality and moved with drama. And we had to do it with no tools. You weren't able to even pull a wireframe up on the screen and make it move. Couldn't even do that. You could only see a wireframe, a very primitive wireframe, at one frame at a time. And you could ask for frame 1 and frame 20 and frame 60, and you can kind of see them, but you could never see them move. But what was kind of terrifying about Tron is we would plot out these very complicated moves. We'd have vehicles chasing each other down irregular canyons with cameras flying through the air and twisting and rolling and diving. And all that had to be done with these very simple graphs. We had to go ahead and break it down frame by frame by frame, increment by increment. Because let's say you've got an object, like a light cycle. A light cycle, for every frame that it moves,
it will need at least 6 numbers to describe its position. It will need its X, Y, and Z translations to show where it is in space, and then it will need its yaw, pitch, and roll to describe how it's tilting. So that means for 100 frames, you need 600 numbers of data. 100 frames is 4 seconds. So you need 600 numbers to describe where it is. Now you can imagine us sitting around writing 600 numbers for 4 seconds for one thing, right? So what we would do is we would figure out on graph paper, okay, the light cycle is going to start here on frame 1, and then 3 seconds later on frame 72, it's going to be over here, and it's going to travel an S curve. So gee, if I just take frame 1, frame 20, frame 60, and frame 72, I'll just take those 4 frames, I'll run down the hall, I'll plug those into the Oxbury computer thing, I'll hit a button, and all these numbers will come up. And then I just sat there with my exposure sheet, and I wrote down all 600 numbers on an X sheet. And we gave these guys at the computer company these exposure sheets with 6 rows of numbers for every single frame. And they went and they hand programmed them in. They typed them in. There was no way to just like download it. You know, you didn't have a floppy disk you could put it on. You just, you typed it.
Come on, you scuzzy data, be in there. Come on.
And then the very, very first time we would see it move would be in 70 millimeter on the stage. We would go to the sound stage at Disney, and we would stand there in front of a gigantic 70 millimeter screen, and they would reel this film up, 70 millimeter film on a projector, and they'd run it. And that'd be the very first time we'd see it move. That was our pencil test.
You look at any PlayStation 2 game or an Xbox game, and the complexity of the visual there is infinitely more complex than Tron, and it's on the fly. You know, and in the movie Tron, Flynn is playing a rastergraphic game, you know, driving a tank through, and it's all shaded and everything. At that time, that was the games that people were playing were, you know, Asteroids and Pong, and they were like 2D.
There were I can't say off the top of my head that we started by saying we want to do light cycles. I mean, where I think these things came together was out of the idea of a game grid, an arena, where various games could be played. And some of that comes from the original Atari games. I mean, not directly, but just we were inspired when we saw these games, Pong and what have you, and there was a game, I believe, called Breakout. We looked at the games that were out there in the world. They inspired us to create this sort of Spartacus-like arena, this gladiatorial arena, and then we, through a series, you know, of artists and over a period of months, we developed these conceptually. Because they were so graphic back then, the games lent themselves to a sort of artistic interpretation. It's completely different now. I'm working on ideas for Tron 2, and now one looks at the world of video games and they're so realistic, you know? So in some ways, the capability to generate reality, which was supposed to liberate us, has actually in some ways limited us.
Tron was a tour de force of technique matched to very difficult methods of bringing that vision off.
Technically, you know, it was the first movie to use computer graphics extensively.
Tron was one of the first films to have more than 20-some minutes computer-generated footage.
We were not nominated for a Special Effects Academy Award because basically the Academy thought we cheated when we used computers to do special effects. Things have certainly changed since then.
The computer world at that time was very limited.
We had no computers on the set of Tron, and probably your cell phone has more computing power in it than we had on the whole movie.
In fact, the limitation produced a lot of the design, the look of the various vehicles. My original idea for the light cycle was to have the rider with a faceplate, and when he got on the bike, the faceplate would match the bike, and he would articulate onto the bike sort of like a pressure suit.
And they just couldn't do it. The computing power just didn't exist to render at that level. Listberger and team had to use practical tools to make a world that looked digital.
I promised you that if I ever got any information about your dad, I'd tell you first, right? I was paged last night. Came from your dad's office at the arcade. So? The number's been disconnected for 20 years. 2 nights before he disappeared, he came to my house. He said he was about to change everything. Science, medicine, religion. He wouldn't have left that, Sam. He wouldn't have left you.
Alan, you're acting like I'm gonna find him sitting there working. Just, hey, kiddo, lost track of time.
Wouldn't that be something?
Long time. You have no idea.
I've learned a lesson that some things in life that are really good take just about forever to happen, but it's worth holding on and working for them. This is one of those things. When the lights dim and I hear the sounds, 25 years disappear and I'm back in Tron.
Here we go.
Was talking with a number of colleagues at Disney who had been thinking about Tron, and I said, here are the things I just really remember off of my gut. I remember suits that were lit, light cycles, Jeff Bridges, and a screen that looked unlike any movie screen I'd ever seen before. I said, in my opinion, that's what we're beholden to.
This is the key to a new order.
Sean Bailey called me in for a general meeting in July 2007. And, you know, in a general meeting, typically you talk about a couple different projects, but Sean really wanted to talk to me about Tron and just ask me what would my take be on a Tron sequel.
Very shortly thereafter, we met Eddie Kitsis and Adam Horowitz.
Our agents called us and said, would you be interested in Tron, which was like the dream come true because we were both obsessed with the movie.
We felt like there were certain design elements and pieces that they had done incredibly well and were incredibly ahead of their time, but we also felt we had to do some new things. And I guess so at first I was a little apprehensive about bringing that up with Steven Lisberger.
Everybody wants to see cyberspace get real, and I think that's a really exciting thing, to have all this technology behind it, to realize it in a way that we couldn't have conceived of when we did the first film.
A movie like this, you know, you can talk till you're blue in the face, but ultimately you need to show them something. So I proposed the idea of creating a 2 or 3 minute piece, kind of like a mini trailer for a movie that didn't exist yet.
We'll shoot walk-offs and take them through a series of moves. That'll get the movement we want.
It was funny, as we started to write the script, Joe went off to shoot the test footage.
We got Jeff to be a part of it, which is really important. I don't think this movie would exist without him being involved. He was integral to even getting this thing off the ground.
This technology was so fascinating, and that was very exciting to come to realize all the things that you can do. So I jumped for it, and we shot this trailer.
Okay, lights out, please. Okay, you want to move around a little bit? Just.
We started saying, you know, we think we have a story to tell, but does anyone care? And we thought, you know, Comic-Con has become kind of the barometer for what people are interested in when it comes to big movies.
We showed it to an audience that had no idea they were going to see it. I remember sitting there with Joe and a couple of guys from the studio, And we were really nervous because we thought, well, if this plays well, we're probably off and making our movie, and if it doesn't, we're probably not.
You won, okay? It's just a game!
Not anymore. The film got such a great reaction from the fans that Disney said, oh yeah, we can put the money that it's going to cost to make this film a reality.
It was one of those things where you kind of dream it, you imagine best case scenario, and then everything just kind of fell into place.
And action!
Look back and then maybe get up on the pedals a little bit like you're racing and kind of say, come on, Dad, let's race. You know, you can talk to him a little bit, right?
Are we gonna mic him? Yeah, that's good. So you look back and smile at him. Action, flight, folks.
The challenge of writing Tron was coming into it and saying, how do we honor the original movie, continue that story, expand on it, and take it to a new place while also opening up the world for new fans.
Tron and I, we beat the evil MCP and finally got out, and finally we came home.
There's so much interesting, mythology in the first movie, and then we said, it has been so long. And a lot of our target audience won't have seen the original. They won't have been born when the original was created.
At the end of the original Tron, Kevin Flynn jumps out of a helicopter on top of Encom Tower. And what we're saying at that point is he created the Tron video game based on his experiences in that movie. At the same time, he's continuing to do research on this universe that he found. So he actually spends his nights beaming himself in and out of the computer world.
So we just kind of wrote this interim mythology from 82 to 89, where he gets stuck inside of the computer again, disappears off the face of the planet, for the next 20 years or so.
Well, Kevin went into the computer and he got stuck in there, and he's been in there for 20 years, and that's where we find him.
The notion of living inside a computer world as an avatar is something that couldn't be more relevant in 2010.
We put together a really exciting room of people from Caltech and JPL to test our theories of, the biological form going into digital space.
And remarkably, they said, well, under certain circumstances, we could imagine in the future, if you had enough computing power and you use something called quantum science, you could have such a circumstance.
Relates directly to quantum teleportation. I mean, it fits the quantum teleportation model. His quantum information is destroyed in the process of recreating the quantum information.
It's teleportation, not cloning.
It is disappeared.
Yeah.
It is not physically destroyed. It is actually negated.
I love those guys. They've read the script, and the next thing you know, you've got a neuroscientist arguing with an artificial intelligence scientist about what an ISO girl program would really be thinking.
There are a lot of geek women like myself who love computer games, but the computer games we love are the ones that get us involved emotionally.
You realize that what Lisberger came up with all those years ago really touched a nerve with people and really kind of ignited imaginations in some way.
Each generation sees their role differently. Part of this generation's challenge is how to make this stuff real, how to bring computers into your everyday life, and they're making the film real the same way. This film really belongs to the next generation. Should I pass him a torch? Should we make it official?
Just set it, maybe.
The disc.
Yeah.
It's a giant world. There's a lot more story out there than we're able to explore in our film.
There's a whole world that has grown, and we're just kind of scratching the surface of that world. And that's something that's exciting to us, is that there's a deeper mythology that we're just kind of getting into.
Then 1982, I fell asleep on stage 4, and I woke up in the next Tron film. I feel like Rip Van Winkle.
Please like, subscribe, and comment on the video. May the Force be with you.